Some viewers may find this content disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Deese from Small Town Monsters. Yes, we just had Heather on the other day, and now we have you. And previous to that, we had Brian Seach and Jamie King. Yes, it has been excellent to be collaborating with Small Town Monsters here on Midnight Lycanthropy on StarFox Radio. Much better. I did need to replenish some lost, valuable nutrition. And now I feel ready to go. It is time for Aaron and I to take a walk into the darkness. My creatures of the night, yes, once again, it is Midnight Lycanthropy time here on StarFox Radio. We have another member of Small Town Monsters who has stopped by tonight to hang out with us. Yes, Aaron Deese is in the house. How are you doing tonight, my friend?
Man, I'm fantastic. How are you? Thanks so much for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
I appreciate you. It's awesome to get a chance to sit down with you and really pick your mind for a bit. And heck yeah, I appreciate it because you're a super busy guy. So is the whole squad of Small Town Monsters. But
Yeah, man. Thanks. My name's Aaron. I'm a content producer and a writer with Small Town Monsters. I've written two books on the Dogman phenomenon, the Texas Dogman Triangle and Hunting Grounds, Dogman of the Lakes. And just a week ago, our latest documentary on the topic came out, which is Dogman Territory: Werewolves in the Land Between the Lakes, which I also happen to appear in with Shannon LeGros. So an exciting time to have this conversation. Yeah.
that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Everyone should know that's listening to my thread who you are because you guys are definitely legendary. And I have your page up on my suggestions on YouTube for everyone to check out. And I'll say it here too. If you like what I do, well, Small Town Monsters does it on a much larger platform base, that's for sure, and has a lot more to work with and can put out way longer content. So I do encourage everyone to go over there. They put out great stuff consistently, and it's not just Dogman things. Whereas here, I just talk about Dogman, but they have a plethora of stuff that at the end of the video, I'll make sure when I do get a chance to upload it, all the links to their page will be up. So make sure everyone checks it out.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, man. So, yeah, the Dogman Triangle is a pretty infamous name, and that you had dubbed, which gave me inspiration to, come up with the Werewolf Square, which is like I was speaking to you about in that range between like Wisconsin, Ohio, LBL, parts of Pennsylvania and West Virginia. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to pick your mind a little bit and hear your thoughts on some of your experiences down in the Dogman Triangle, or just in general, what you'd like to say. The mic's yours, my friend.
Yeah, man, for sure. Well, the Dogman Triangle, I mean, just in case somebody's not familiar with it, it's, basically a geographical area which makes up a good chunk of the state of Texas, not the whole thing, but the topmost point is Dallas, and then we've got San Antonio down at the bottom left and Houston all the way over at the bottom right. And that term came about because my wife and I were trying to think of cool episode names for our first podcast, which is called Hey Strangeness, which is kind of still around. It's there. It'll be updated again one day. But initially, that term was just applicable to 3 sightings that were in the Austin area, Austin, Llano, and kind of in that general vicinity up on the northern end there. And altogether, they made up a 700 square triangle. These 3 initial sightings, and I was like, oh, cool, Texas Dogman Triangle. That's a neat name. But then the more I look into it, man, and anybody who's seen the documentary or who's looked into this stuff on their own or read the book, which if you have, thank you, that's great. There's a lot more than just 3 Dogman sightings in Texas. I think I looked at 23, 27, something like that initially when I wrote the book. And I've had, gosh, I think 6 additional encounters that people have reached out to me about. And they're like, hey, I read your book or I saw your movie. I actually saw one of these things back in 1954 was the one lady I talked to recently. She's in her 70s now. And so basically, like, Texas is full of Dogman, and I felt like nobody was talking about it. And so when Small Town Monsters approached me about doing a book about it, I was like, yeah, let's please definitely do that. So and now you and I are having this conversation.
That's some pretty legendary stuff right there. That's awesome to hear how it kind of all falls into place. And isn't it so beautiful sometimes how things get paved out like that?
Dude, for sure. Like, we hear the term synchronicity a lot, in this community, and I think there is something to be said for just plain old coincidence. Like, sometimes stuff just happens, but then sometimes stuff happens in a very specific and detailed way, and you're like, I almost feel like somebody planned this out, and that's why this is happening to me right now. Like, the first 3 Dogman encounters I looked at, one of them was from a personal friend, actually a family member, and they appear in the Texas Dogman Triangle documentary on the phone under an assumed name. But if you've seen the documentary and you've heard that phone call, that's the actual witness who gave me that initial report. And it just so happened at the time, I think a week before, he and I had this conversation about it. I had seen Small Town Monsters documentary, The Bray Road Beast, which is about, Linda Godfrey's work and the Beast of Bray Road. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have seen that. And it just set me on this whole path where I was like, wait, the werewolves might actually be real, And then I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but the more you look into this topic, the more it kind of gets its claws into you, pun very much intended. And here I am 3 years later with 2 books on it, and I'm like, already, I have enough in my head for a third. Like, it just keeps going. It doesn't let you go.
That's legendary again. Isn't this so funny how that all pans out once again? I mean, it's pretty much how it unfolded for a ton of us. I mean, I know that's how it unfolded for me as a child with looking at Jody and Linda's work. And I actually have a PDF file. It's such in a rough draft form because it goes from first person to second person. I just wanted to make sure I took everything that I had written down on pieces of paper, things stored in my head, and just really make sure to put it down into book form. So last night was the first time I got a chance a little bit to work on it while I was working on some videos, and it's up to like 540 pages, and I got encounters.
Dude.
Yeah, all the way
Dude.
from 290 BC all the way up until, just last week. And I have it broken down from Europe, where I got, India, all the way to California, my friend, and like the Northeast and such. So, yeah, like you were saying, there's so much just to dive into that it's really hard. And as a journalist, I feel like to make sure I'm doing my job properly, I only can focus on the Dogman because, as I just stated, there's so much occurring that I wouldn't be doing the topic justice if I was to be covering something else, just because there's so much that needs to be understood.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Like, we had a Small Town Monsters Monster Fest here at the end of June, and we did a Q&A panel with some of the guests and the crew members. And, one of the questions that was asked, I think it was my good buddy John Killian over at XV Planus, was like, what keeps you guys going, doing this stuff day after day? And so many people gave such good answers, but mine was something to the effect of like, there's still stories to be told. There are still people who have not confided in anybody because they think they're the only person that's ever seen this thing. There are people who don't know who to go to, who have spent their whole lives going, I must be losing my mind. Like, that kind of work matters. And when we're talking about Dogman specifically, I think it's a lot easier to say, I had a Sasquatch sighting or I had a UFO sighting, because that's at least something that people go, okay, yeah, I know that that happens. You know what I mean? But like with Dogman, that's not something that's in the mainstream as like, oh yeah, that's a real thing. So like I feel like this kind of work has some significance, at least for people like that. It provides them a place to go.
Kudos, preach, my friend. And it's so ironic how that is, because I would argue that there's just as much evidence that could state there's more than there is solidifying UFOs or Bigfoot. And people will be like, well, wait, we're talking about an upright canine. It's not possible. And I try to reiterate to people that the way we approach it here at the North American Dogman Project is that we break it down into 3 sectors: paranormal, potentially, extraterrestrial, potentially, and physical, potentially. And
Hmm.
we have reports that come into all categories. And I try to encourage people that there is a terminology when someone says, oh, it looked like a dog man or a canine. But the thing is, there are many animals that look like canines that aren't canines, meaning hyenas, for
Hmm.
example. As I stated numerous times on some of my episodes, they're related to mongoose and civets, so they are not canines, yet they have manes and long snouts and pointy ears and glowing eyes. And there's a ton of reports of type 3 hyenas. And at one point in time, North American cave hyenas did exist and supposedly only went extinct around 10,000 to 11,000 years ago. Yet there really is no reason for them to, because the climate in their areas hasn't distinguished or exceeded what it used to be. And also the cave systems elements are still almost identical. And then you have bears, the short-faced cave bear. Again, bears are not canine. And the bear man, Bearzilla, well, the short-faced cave bear, again, 10,000, 11,000 years ago, spent around 90% of its existence roaming around the caves, which only 10% of the caves actually connect to the outside. And it would come out and get its food and go amongst its day. And also dire wolves. A lot of people don't realize dire wolves aren't related to canines at all in regards of modern day DNA. So it wouldn't come back as canine based, potentially related to it. And then you have the Dinopithecus, which is the enormous baboon that is potentially still reported to be living in South Africa, but was again reported to go extinct around 10,000, 11,000 years ago. Spends time in caves and the prairies, etc., and could easily came up across the land bridges. And when people are, again, a baboon looks like a raging werewolf and is not canine
Hmm.
based. I try to encourage people not to take such a closed mind on it, because all those animals did exist and some of those still exist. Hyenas exist today, baboons exist, and there are reports in the late 1700s of people down in the Everglades seeing a large baboon-like creature. They could have easily came up with modern day people, or they could have just made their way up. Also, the actual non-extinct versions of themselves. And how do you feel about all that?
No, I'm with you, man. I'm with you, because like you said, we know these animals exist. And a lot of times when we get these descriptions, hyena like, baboon like, those come up again and again and again and again. When people tell me I saw something that distinctly resembles a Hollywood werewolf, I believe that person. Because again, I think you got to have a lot of sand. You got to have a lot of sand. That's an old phrase I learned recently, to be willing to make that statement to somebody. But usually when I'm talking to a witness, they're not telling me I factually saw a biological upright canine. They're describing what they saw, and that's the terminology that comes up. So, and especially if we're talking about some of these places like Texas, we have some descriptions that fall into that hyena-like category. You mentioned Florida a moment ago. We got a lot of people out here with a lot of land. I actually grew up in Central Florida before I moved to Texas. Same situation out there. You got these wild folks living out in the swamp on 5, 6, 7, 8 acres, surrounded by trees. And like, I met people that kept Bengal tigers in cages in their backyard. I knew a guy who kept alligators. There was a neighbor down the street that had emus. So I don't think all of those animals were owned legally, and
Hmm.
occasionally animals escape from cages. So, you mix some of that in with a situation where you maybe don't get the best look. Maybe it's at night, the witness is under duress. I absolutely think that that is the root of some of these sightings that we're seeing. But as you and I both know, it doesn't cover the full breadth of what the people who are experiencing the Dogman phenomena are reporting, But I definitely believe that there are some known animals thrown into the mix there. And I love the theory, both because I think it's cool and because I think it makes sense scientifically. I love the idea that some of these may be older species or, offshoots of older species that have just been reduced in such numbers, they're in such isolated places that we see them only fleetingly. I definitely think there's something to that idea.
I appreciate that, and I couldn't agree more with everything you just stated. And yeah, I try to logically approach things and also subjectively and objectively. And yeah, I do understand there are a ton of different variations that are occurring. And I just think like what we were just speaking about is definitely a portion of what people are seeing. But then you get the ones of the manifestations or the ones that seem like someone is shining a light, but they're not fully there in the realm with you are. So yeah, there's definitely more than just that part. But I just tried to again encourage people to understand that it's not just what people think of the traditional werewolf. I think werewolf is a term that people just describe and use, but a werewolf again really doesn't have, in my eyes, much to do with the dogman. A werewolf is more of the curse of lycanthropy and like the Rougarou, and then you have your skinwalkers and your Wendigos, which are you wearing the pelt of the animal that you have taken. And never in the Navajo lores do they speak of turning into the raging beast. It's always he or she on all fours. And then you get into the dogman part where I don't believe the dogman can take on the form of a human being and go back and forth. For example, like say a Wendigo, which is more of the dark magics, and a werewolf, which would be a curse. I believe the dogman is in that form, and it's yeah, super interesting, but also really healthy and good to look at it first logically, and then once those pieces of the puzzle don't really fully line up, or they do, then step outside of the box and look all around. And I try to encourage people. It's good to ask healthy, skeptical questions. There's obviously a bad way to be skeptical, but there's good ways to just be a healthy skeptic, meaning not believing everything that's been presented, because I've had so many times where things have been presented where I had a fishy feeling about it, but then I was able to be verified that it was not good through other individuals. It is more than one layer for sure, like you were stating, yet you've spent a ton of time digging into this subject just in general. What do you have for thoughts adding to that or outside of that?
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, and I get in this discussion with people a lot, the separation of terms between dogman and werewolf, and I tend to use them interchangeably simply because the etymological roots are very similar. But
Ditto.
you're right, but I do agree with you. There is a distinct difference between when we're talking about dogman as a cryptid, a potential species, a potential relic animal, something like that, and this idea of the shapeshifter motif or of the supernatural entity. Those are two, I think, and I'm saying this as a theory, I think those are two very different things. Now, why the upright canine motif crosses over into both of those realms, I don't really know. Are shape-shifting werewolf legends, are those sprung from our ancestors who witnessed some of these biological canine-looking creatures walking on two legs and they morphed into these stories about shapeshifters? Maybe. Is there some spectral entity that presents itself in the form of an upright canine? Maybe. But then we have to have a whole discussion about, well, what is the supernatural realm? What are spirits? What are ghosts? What are demons? It becomes so much bigger than this idea of just werewolves or just dogmen, because the upright canine motif has been with us since ancient Mesopotamia in one form or another, all over the world, all throughout history, different cultures, different examples, different folk tales, right up to the modern day. And if you look at the sum total of history, people have worried about werewolves being real far longer than we've considered them an invention of fiction. You know what I mean? If you go all the way back through ancient Europe. So for me, like, it comes down to this massive question of why? Why is this motif constantly recurring with us? Why do we latch onto it so much? And I don't know if I'm answering your question or if I've gone off on a completely different side tangent. But for me, that's kind of where I get wrapped up with this.
No, that was absolutely beautiful, my friend, because again, I couldn't agree more. And yeah, there's just different terminologies that, again, I use as interchangeable, but I do try to stress to people there are differences. I mean, whether someone says werewolf, wolfman, dogman, dog boy, wolf boy, fox man, coyote man, bearzilla, the terms are all there, but it's still, to me, I'm still researching as a dogman or a dogman encounter,
Yeah.
so. And also, yeah, with like baboons, for example, I encourage people to look up how they move, how they act, how their legs look. Their back legs look very canine, like bent. And like I said, they're quadrupedal and bipedal. And we get a ton of reports and tracks that solidify something is running quadrupedally and bipedally, almost like
Hmm.
it's using its momentum to, push itself up. So it is super interesting. And that's why I try to make sure to always pick people's minds, such as yours, and other people that I value and consider more intelligent than myself. And that's why I have a science team too. I mean, we have environmentalists, we have a geologist, we have, the tracker I was just speaking about, who's a master survivalist too. And now we would really like to try to get a zoologist or a couple biologists. And that way, I understand I'm just a journalist. And when people or like, hey, you are just a journalist or you're just a content creator, etc. I understand that. And I'm not offended by that. But that's why I like to make sure I have my science team with me because everything I'm saying, they can solidify it and verify it. But like I said, I'm just a journalist. Okay, I'll defer. And that way, it's really hard to keep on turning a blind eye when you actually have people that are specialized and have the education that the scientific realm wants. And there are three facts, like I said, people are missing in the national parks. People are
Hmm.
missing near the cave systems, and also there are unknown footprints and unknown sightings of things all across the globe. And we have a ton of prints that are very strange, and a lot of people that if you're not good with tracking, I used to be horrible with it. I'm still not even close to trained, but Nuxium has really showed me a trick or two to understand things. But like bear tracks and hyena tracks look very similar, and we have a lot of tracks in here in North America of recent that look to be hyena. So again, okay, what are they doing here? And same thing, we have baboon tracks, which again, baboon feet look kind of bearish as well. So a lot of times the reason I say that is people will send in like footprints of fox or raccoons and they'll be like, oh, look how big this is. And it's a really big misunderstanding as to what tracks really are. So that's why it's good to have people like Nuxium to defer to, and he'll explain how sand, snow really causes like differences in how the track's going to look when water obviously is in there and moisture, when heat expands, contrasts, etc. So yeah, no, it's important. And that's why, like I said, I really wanted to try to link up with you because you've been doing this for quite a long time. And do you have any favorite cases you've covered or potential favorite encounters?
Yeah, one I'd really love to go back to is the Plum Creek monster, the Beast of Plum Creek. And this was in Lockhart, Texas. This was circa the 1980s. I've been getting my dates mixed up lately, but there was a rash of cases being reported in local newspapers. And Lockhart is a small community. Today it's got about 40,000 people, which is still pretty small by big Texas city standards. But back then it was very, very small, rural farming, just a church, a few houses, some stores, but not a whole lot of like people coming and going all the time. But Mr. James Witter was one of the primary witnesses, and he saw these things on numerous occasions. And he actually described them as hyena-like, as sitting up on, their rear legs, kind of on their haunches, walking on two legs, then running very, very quickly on all fours. So that change in stance you were talking about earlier. But what's interesting about this is it got coverage from local newspapers, and the original witnesses, the people who saw it, they made an agreement. Mr. James Witter was one of them, to not come forward and to share the story. Two of the people that had the initial encounter with him got drunk one night, ended up telling a bunch of people at a bar, and that's how it made it into the newspapers. But Mr. Witter stayed out of the public eye. He didn't do interviews. He wasn't in documentaries. He wasn't in podcasts, until Heather Mosier got a hold of him, and we were able to interview him for the Texas Dogman Triangle. And that case compels me so much, because anytime you have a witness who is not seeking that public attention, who is not looking to, give an interview, and no disrespect to anybody who is. I mean, I wouldn't have a job if nobody would give interviews. Okay. So that's not a, that's not a negative on those people. But when you meet somebody who has that reticence to come forward, who is hesitant, but then does still say, yeah, I saw this thing and this is what it looked like, that is very, very compelling to me. And Mr. Witter, he's an old time Texas rancher, wears a cowboy hat and Wrangler jeans. Like, he's a cattleman. Like he knows how to like lasso. Like he tells a story in the Texas Dogman Triangle about chasing one of these things on a horse in an attempt to lasso it. And he tells it with just such frank, factual. He's not like making big gestures and like, oh, and then no, he's like, I took off after it outran me. Like it's so factual and so dead to the point that I'm just like, that story always gets me. Always gets me.
Yeah, I've actually seen you on one of your episodes. I can't remember which one that was, where that gentleman was talking about that. And yeah, some crazy nightmare fuel right there. And I actually spoke to Heather last week. She's totally amazing as well. So, like I said, all y'all do some amazing stuff, and definitely pass it on to Seth as well. I would have loved to get him on here, but Heather said he's not really much about the podcast life. So
he likes doing them, man, but he's swamped on this stuff all the time. Like he very frequently goes into what I've heard him refer to as the editing cave or the editing dungeon or something like that. But he'll just like work on a project for days and I won't hear from him. And then and then it's like, hey guys, this movie's ready, but
I know how that is. We'll make sure to, like I said, tell him I do think he's awesome as well, and that I would have
thanks, man,
loved
for
to.
sure.
Yeah, I definitely would have wanted to get him on. That I did try to reach out to him so he doesn't feel like he's left out.
Yeah, I'll put in a good word for you for sure.
That's awesome. That's good stuff. Down in the Texas area too, have you ever heard the Lyle Blackburn encounter where the father told the boy basically you need to go out hunting, and the kid wasn't really about that, and his father still made him go out, and he came back and was terrified, saying that he'd seen basically like this wolf-like creature, and his father was like, yeah, okay, buddy, you're going back out and you need to get that deer. Sent his kid back out, and the kid never came back, so his father went and got some neighbors and friends, and they went to look for him, and they found, yeah, him being consumed by what looked to be some sort of crazy canine-like creature. You heard that one before?
Yeah, you're referring to the Converse Wolfman, which is another one of my favorites for a couple of reasons. This one is kind of an old Texas hill country story. Nobody knows exactly where it comes from, and I've actually interviewed Mr. Blackburn on this one, as well as Michael Mays, and chatted with Ken Gerhardt about it as well. But it's just one of those old Texas hill country stories that's been floating around since nobody really knows when. But the general version goes that it originates in like the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it tracks. Like Converse is I don't want to call it a sub city. It's a great community, but it's it's offshot from San Antonio. It's a little bit north. And a lot of people that live in Converse work in San Antonio and vice versa. Like it's very much a shared community. But, go back to the early 1800s. This was all farm, flatland, scrubland, plains, nothing. So there's this whole idea that it would have been a very normal thing for a young man of age 14, 15 to go off and shoot a deer, and for his father to expect him to do that. Like that's just a thing. People do that today, and they don't have to because we have grocery stores. So back then, obviously. But what's cool about this one to me, aside from the fact that it's a very interesting and compelling story, is that Converse was predominantly founded by German settlers, I believe in the 1800s. And it's another example of places where we have European settlers who have a long-standing history of werewolf legends showing up in America, and then all of a sudden we have another werewolf story that seems to pop up. Like the Defiance Wolfman of Defiance, Ohio. We have the Scottish Wolver. A lot of the settlers of Defiance were Scottish. And we could probably trace general lines from just about any big city in America to just about any community in Europe if we really, really wanted to. But that's one of the things about the Converse story that's so interesting to me is it was predominantly a German settlement. And here's this very scary werewolf story that kind of seems to run in the vein of some of those older folk tales about, you know, uh, this is a French one, but the Beast of Gévaudan. I don't think that's a werewolf story. It just comes up a lot in these conversations. But people, children, going about their farming business, being attacked by these creatures, So I kind of rambled on that one. But yes, I really like the Converse Wolfman story. I think it's an interesting one.
Truly is some nightmare fuel. And next time we link up, I got a ton of interesting stuff to tell you about the Beast of Gévaudan that will pick your mind and make you scratch your head for sure.
Yeah.
Yet we do at some point, unfortunately, need to let you get back to your busy schedule. But before you do have to leave everybody, my friend, what about the Thibodeau case with the brothers and their friend that were out fishing? And I had a chance to speak to them, but it's been covered on a bunch of different shows, and they've spoke to other people as well, where the light kept going out on the fishing boat because they had the old crusty wires, and they could hear and see these things coming towards them every time the light would come back on, and they were like, get the light going, get the light going. Have you heard that one before too?
Man, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not as familiar with that one. I think I've heard it mentioned a couple times, but I don't know anything about it beyond what you just mentioned. Yeah.
Ooh, I do have it covered. I'll definitely, when you get a chance, check out some of the stuff on my thread. But yeah, long story
Yeah.
short, it's three friends are out fishing on Lake Texacoma, and it's getting late at night. And they have these old, like I said, crappy wires on this fishing boat, but they don't really care because it serves its purpose for the most part if they need the
Sure.
spotlight, etc. And they're getting ready to finish up for the night, and they start hearing large crunching and strange sounds coming from nearby. And of course, as they want to turn the light on to check, because all they really have is the moonlight, the light wouldn't work for a second. So they're trying to get their buddy to fix it. And he finally gets it to flicker on. And they see this thing sitting, I don't know the exact distance, but too close for their comfort, looking at them from the brush. And the light goes out, and then they said that they could hear like it moving around. Then all of a sudden they get the light on again, but it's not where it was. And they shine it over here, and then it's like standing up, and then the light goes out again, and also they're like, "Come on, get the light on, get the light!" And they're all trying to get in the boat at this point in time. And then when they get the light on again, there was like another one, and as they like finally get the boat going and they leave, one of them like came into the water a little bit to watch them like go away. But yeah, it's straight up nightmare stuff right there too.
I will say that behavior is consistent with what we see in other dogman heavy areas. And I'm thinking of the land between the lakes and Texas specifically. You do get numerous reports of them seeming interested in boats, watching people, from across a lake or by the shore. So I don't have enough of a familiarity with that case to have an opinion on it, but I will say that that is a consistent activity in a lot of these reports. Yeah.
And a lot of people definitely don't understand that. Yeah, I feel that a ton of interesting reports of them swimming and being around in the water like a young couple, heard splashing and got up and saw this wolf-like creature in the water looking like it was trying to pick up shellfish. I believe this was in Canada, and as they
Hmm.
approached it, it turned around and dove underneath the water and ended up coming up like on the far bank on the other side, and then got up and like went into the forest. So no, there's definitely some pretty interesting encounters that occur around the water or in the water for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, then you have, I mentioned it a little while ago, but the Scottish folk tale of the Wolver, which is a, aquatic werewolf. They're supposed to be good at fishing. They're supposed to be good at catching fish. Some stories they actually have intelligence, like they use tools and communicate with people. So, again, you got to wonder if some of these folk tales are linked to some of these modern day encounters if you go far enough back. I don't know the answer to that, but
That's a
You gotta
great
wonder.
question. Yeah, no, you do have to wonder because it is super intriguing how every culture has so much to speak about with the topic. So, no, I do appreciate you stopping in tonight, man, and hanging out with us and letting me pick your brain for a bit and just sharing some of your opinions and information you've gathered. Because, I consider you a legend and I watch your stuff, and I really don't have much time to watch too many things outside of Bruins hockey when it's on and such, but I always do try to support everybody that is good to me. So I've always thought you guys were pretty legendary. So
Oh, thank you, man. I really appreciate that, dude. I was just not just, but like I was a fan 2 years ago. I wasn't involved in this stuff creatively, so when people say stuff like that, like it means a lot. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for everyone who once again stopped by tonight for another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on Star Fox Radio. If you do enjoy my content, please like, subscribe, and share it. Feed the algorithm, and I will see you on the next one.